Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. We're here with Robin Wauters. Robin is a seasoned technology journalist, analyst, keynote speaker, and event curator. Robin is also the founding editor of Tech.eu, the premier source of European news, data analysis, and market intelligence. He was formerly the European editor of The Next Web, and before that, a senior editor at TechCrunch. He's also one of the co-founders of Be Central, the exciting digital campus located in Brussels Central Station that has helped thousands of people learn technologies, grow a startup, and have positive impact on society. Welcome, Robin. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us here today.
Good morning, Zara. Good morning, everyone. Pleasure to be here, really.
So to kick it off, I'd love to hear more about your background. So let's start with your aha moment of going into journalism. Was it something that you always wanted to do, or something you came across a little later?
Yeah, great question. I actually wanted to be a journalist when I was in my teens, and actually went to school thinking I was going to be studying journalism. But there was like a basic year that you had to choose either between PR, marketing, and journalism. And after my first year, I hated the journalism courses so much that I ended up picking marketing instead. And actually, my first jobs were more in marketing for tech companies, to be fair. Than in journalism. I just kind of rolled into it at a later stage when blogging professionally became sort of a thing in the mid 2000s. But that's sort of the gist of it. Yeah.
Oh, so you went from wanting to be a journalist, then to marketing, and back to journalism. Oh, fantastic.
I hated the rigidness of like journalism works this way, and you have to write with this lead, and then after a few months, of course, I was like, this is not for me. It's really not for me. I love writing, but I love being creative about it, and there were too many rules to my liking, so I never actually pursued it.
So when you talk about this rigidity of journalism, you're talking specifically about that in the education system and how it was taught rather than journalism as an industry, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, I think the best journalists that I know never went to journalism school, so...
Absolutely. Yeah. And how did you find marketing? Was that different, or did you also find that was a little bit too rigid for your liking?
It wasn't. Back then, this is a while ago, but this is like 21 years ago when I enrolled in college. The courses that I took was called cyber marketing still. Using the word. Yeah, so it was like online marketing avant la lettre. I had a really good professor who really got me excited about the possibilities about the internet, which was still relatively young back then, So I owe it to studying marketing for everything else that followed. It's just that I never really used those skills anymore because marketing itself has evolved quite a lot in the meantime.
Oh, for sure. And so once you started marketing, how did you get back into journalism? What was that first leap?
It's a good question. I was working in sort of online advertising, online marketing, and I started following some blogs about it. And I remember reading these individuals just like writing on the internet without having a publication or having studied for it. And I thought this is something that I really want to do sort of on top of my full-time job and activities. And that sort of escalated into becoming a professional blogger. But there was really no plan to it. It just sort of happened.
Yeah, this is a recurring theme that we're seeing, that the internet has democratized access to being able to get your voice and your thoughts out there. And that in turn has led to so many opportunities. So the people we've had through Edventure emerge, whatever domain they're in, from biotech, AI, fintech, they've all said the same thing, that it's important to get your voice out there. And now with, like, for example, even Twitter, it's a great way to do that. So once you started blogging, where did that lead you to next?
So I was blogging, I think mostly in the beginning about online advertising and marketing. Very quickly got into sort of, I don't know if the audience remember this, but there was a period of time where Web 2.0 was really sort of describing the generation of new internet entrepreneurs and online communities. There was Delicious and Dig and all of these, and Flickr. So I got really interested in sort of the Silicon Valley. Sorry, I don't know if you can hear my kids screaming in the background. I got really interested in sort of this new generation of internet companies and entrepreneurs. Most of them were coming from Silicon Valley. So I started writing about what was happening in Belgium and in Europe, but also like globally, things that I found interesting, just as a user. And that sort of escalated into me blogging professionally. I remember being employed by The Next Web 2006, maybe 2007, where they were paying me 250 euros a month to write about tech sort of in my spare time. And I absolutely loved the fact that someone would pay me to do that, even if it was a very small amount. And that sort of escalated into writing more for them, and then TechCrunch picking me up back in 2008 when I started really blogging full-time.
Oh, that's amazing. It must have been such an exciting time for you as well. I'd love to also hear a bit more about, you were at TechCrunch, but you also founded Tech.eu. I wanted to know, what was your thought process behind that? How was your journey founding it? And how did you know that there was room for another media company in Europe? Because there were a few at the time, but so tell us about Tech.eu.
Yeah, you make me sound very smart and sort of planned ahead, but it wasn't really the case. What happened was I was working for TechCrunch and the Next Web afterwards as a European editor for a couple of years, noticing that really the conversation was shifting a bit too much towards Silicon Valley and a bit too much towards the big tech companies, in my opinion, at least. So I sort of was looking for a way to write more about early stage startups and really innovative tech, and more about Europe. I saw that there was sort of a generation of entrepreneurs in Europe that wasn't being highlighted. There weren't role models outside of their own borders because nobody really knew about them. There were stories to be told that nobody else was doing. So I banded together with a group of friends sort of to start a publication to... sorry.
Do you need to go check on them? Because that's totally fine.
No, as long as they're screaming, that means they're still alive, so they haven't killed each other. It's all good. So basically, I said to myself, there must be some publication writing about this generation of entrepreneurs in Europe and the tech that we're developing here and the stories that we should be proud of. And nobody was doing it. So I just sort of banded together with a group of friends and started it. And that was 8 years ago, almost on the day. It was the end of October, 8 years ago that we launched.
Wow, that's amazing. And give us a brief snapshot of where Tech.eu is at now and what you're most excited about, like, coming up.
Yeah. Also a good question. The ecosystem itself has matured quite a lot. I remember when we started 8 years ago, there was stuff going on, but people even back then said, you can't build a publication around European tech. It's too small in the grand scheme of things. It's never going to grow to a size where you can build a sustainable business on top of that. But we did it anyway. And obviously, especially in the last 3 years, it's sort of been validating our original thinking, is that it's matured to a point where basically there are multiple publications now covering European tech. We're still one of them. It's been fun sort of seeing this shift towards ignoring them. And now everyone else keeps talking about them. But of course, we have a lot of knowledge that we've built up. We have a database of deals. We have the network. We have the access to people. So that sort of gives us an edge. And we're very, very focused on news as well, which I think we do really well. And I think it's also important because the ecosystem has matured quite a lot. But there still is a lot of early stage companies that I'm excited about that I don't think get the recognition that they deserve. And there's only a few journalists in the world writing about tech, and there's a lot of tech entrepreneurs and tech startups out there. So it's becoming increasingly difficult to keep track of everything, right? So we're trying to make an effort to really also highlight the small startups, the ones that are still in seed stage, the ones that are building tech that isn't necessarily sexy or appeals to a mainstream audience, but is still interesting to our audience and to myself.
Yeah, that's such a great point, because journalism, particularly tech journalism, plays such a big role in this aspect of visibility, that people struggle to go and found something when they don't see people that look like them at the same stage very early on doing something. You just see people that have become hit successes and raised multi-million-dollar rounds and things like that, and it looks so far off from the starting point. I think it's really great that you're looking to cover early stages as well, particularly in Europe, because we've seen so many young founders go and start things in Europe. YC had like the largest European cohort yet recently, which I think is super exciting. What kind of role do you think journalism has played in that, of being able to say to people in Europe, like, hey, you don't need to be over there in Silicon Valley to start something awesome. It doesn't need to be in, these sexy sectors. You can start something else, whatever you're interested in. What was journalism's role in that?
Yeah, I think journalism plays a crucial role in something that I've highlighted earlier in the talk, is that there are certain people that are doing amazing things that you might not know about. They're not on TV. They're not YouTube influencers. They're not necessarily people who like even being public about what they're doing, right? So I think journalism job is partly to highlight those stories, to make sure that we sort of provide examples for the next generation of entrepreneurs that they can look up to, learn from, that they can also learn best practices from operators in certain startups and scale-ups that have done it before. So of course, they can build their own platforms to do that. But oftentimes, and especially entrepreneurs in tech, don't necessarily feel the need to be very public about what they're doing and what they're building. They're busy. They're focused on the tech side of things. It's understandable. So giving them a platform to sort of, let them tell their stories, I think is very, very important. And not necessarily only the good stuff, but also the bad stuff, because
of course,
obviously you can learn a lot from the good examples, but maybe even a lot more from what's gone wrong, mistakes that they've made, but also, highlight the bad part of the industry, the bad investors, the entrepreneurs that are not doing it the way that I think it should be done, or doing ethical things or committing fraud. Exposing that is also part of sort of, making sure that the right role models are highlighted, and not just working in tech, because that's not a very glamorous thing to talk about in itself.
Definitely. Destigmatizing those failures and being vocal about, hey, this was actually much more difficult than it looks, is so important. And I wanted to ask you, what kind of cultural differences do you see in European entrepreneurs? Obviously, it's a generalization, but do you think that the Americans are much more vocal about what they're doing? And do you think that's given them some sort of a head start?
Yes, absolutely. And it's something that I see across Europe. It doesn't matter where you go, whether you go to Ukraine or Spain, or even the mature ecosystems like the UK and Sweden and Germany. It is absolutely insane how different entrepreneurs are in the US. Even before they launch, they've already have a story, they have a narrative, they're ambitious, and they're not afraid to tell people what they're doing. It's also a bit of, when you spend enough time in Silicon Valley, you also realize why that is. It's because there's such a high density of people sort of making their way and doing things that nobody else is doing, that sharing what you're doing and being very vocal about your ambition is regarded as something very normal. And your peers will just sort of give you feedback on your idea, maybe help you out and share their best practices very openly, all the time, always, everywhere, right? In Europe, that's not necessarily the case. When you are vocal about something entirely novel or something really, really ambitious, most of the time people will say, well, tone it down a bit, or maybe you should think of this differently, and maybe you should address your home market first before going internationally. Always very modest, always very, well, not always, but for most time, very modest, very, stay on your own turf, and then maybe we'll see, and don't stand out too much from the crowd in certain economies here in Europe. So that plays a big role, I think, in Europe here, in sort of holding us back a little bit in building even bigger companies.
And do you think VC plays a role in that as well? The arguably more risk-averse venture capitalists in Europe compared to the US, whether we're talking about novel, innovative ideas, or we're talking about young founders, which we have a lot of them here today. It's very different in the US and Europe. And do you think they have a role to play in actually widening access to venture capital and getting more people to start companies from non-linear paths?
Yeah, great question. I think you're right. The investors play a huge role. You also have to understand that in Europe, the venture scene, investing in real startups, innovation, is relatively young. I'd say 20 to 25 years old. In the US, they have a few decades on us. So they have built the experience. They have, as I said, the local mindset. They have people from all the world coming there to build their companies. So they have sort of a front row seat to the best entrepreneurs for decades, right? Now that's no longer the case, but the venture community in Europe still needs to mature a lot. I don't know a single entrepreneur or first-time founder in Europe that has told me, wow, the investors here really get it. Like most of the time, they'll say that individual or that firm gets it, but the investment community as a whole, just, they are very risk averse. And as much as I like a lot of the investors that I talk to, that we write about, as much as I think they play a crucial role for the ecosystem, they're needed, of course. Some of them are really, really good too. But as much as I think they play a crucial role, I think if you look at the whole picture, yes, they're still very risk averse. They don't also have the deep pockets that certain, firms like Tiger Global, KKR, SoftBank, these guys are spending billions in late stage venture, and European venture can't keep up with that. Of course, they're maturing, their funds are getting bigger, but that takes a lot of time. And in the meantime, it's still a lot of US investors picking up the best companies here in Europe.
And bearing in mind those constraints, what can we do to kind of move towards where the US is and push to break those boundaries and see more innovative startups come out? Because I think as a result of that, and feel free to push back. But we're seeing a lot of brain drain where, you have from any region outside of the US where you have like the best entrepreneurs, a lot of them go to Silicon Valley for that network, for those investors. How can we try and create mini Silicon Valleys in other areas of the world so that people don't feel they have to leave and they have to be there to do something awesome?
Yeah, I'm going to push back on that a little bit, because I think this whole notion of let's create mini Silicon Valleys around the world is outdated. I think it's, even 10 years ago, it sounded very strange to me already, because, when you look at what an ecosystem actually is, it's sort of like a soup, right? To make a soup, you have to have ingredients. And for an ecosystem, that means a combination of factors. You need entrepreneurs and startups at the center. Without entrepreneurs, everything sort of collapses on its own. So that's always the center. Then you have the investors, you have the corporates, you have the service industries, you have to have the infrastructure, just the sheer internet, and the location also matters. Can you easily get to another place to have either build partnerships or build business? So all of these things combined, universities, supply of talent. There's lots of factors, but if you only have some of these, it's going to be very difficult. One thing that I've learned over the last 15 years of covering tech and ecosystems is this: if you have a successful startup, but I mean really successful, like really, going all the way, building a global leader, IPOing, building a scale up, on a global scale, that changes an ecosystem in more ways than any of these one parts can do on their own, right? So when all of these things sort of click, it's usually after one of these things happen, right? A company gets really big and everything else just follows. In Silicon Valley, you've had thousands of these, right? So there is ecosystems within Silicon Valley, within sectors, within certain age groups. You can't replicate that. So why even try? What you should do is look at your own ecosystem and say, okay, we have capital, we have a good university. What we lack is corporates or service industry, or we don't have enough entrepreneurs, and work on those things. You improve the things that you lack, and you look at other ecosystems as a blueprint. Okay, they have this. How did they build it? Where does it come from? What can we do in our ecosystem? What are our restraints, but what are our opportunities? So that's sort of what I try to tell across Europe. Of course, you have to build mini ecosystems, but please don't call them mini Silicon Valleys, because it will never be that. So you have to sort of go from your own strengths and build from there, which I think even now, like a lot of policymakers still don't understand.
So rather than, let's be the next Silicon Valley, it should be, let's be the first Edinburgh, for example.
Exactly that. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, I love that. And if we look at Brussels, how you're based, I'd love to hear more about the role B Central is playing in that. So what led you to found it, what it's up to now, and what are some of the most exciting milestones in that journey?
Yeah, good question. So I've been involved in the Brussels tech ecosystem for quite a while, also over 12 years. And when I started covering tech internationally, I sort of lost my touch a bit. So to get back involved, I started looking for sort of places where entrepreneurs were coming together, and I didn't really find a lot of them. This is a couple of years ago. So I was also part of I'm making a very, very long story here, sorry. But I was involved in a task force within the Belgian government to see what we could do to promote digital entrepreneurship. From that task force originated an idea to have like a physical location, but not just a small co-working space, but a real campus that we could use to sort of pull in entrepreneurs, but also everyone else from the ecosystem could have a place where they could sort of meet and build companies and scale. And then when it's time to move, then just, take the next step, but at least provide sort of a breeding ground. And it had sort of a social element to it also, because we really focused on how do we get more diversity, how do we get under represented founders in, how do we also provide a space for nonprofits, which I think is also important. They might not have enough the same amount of resources than companies or corporates, but they're very important to the ecosystem. So how do you provide a place for that? And that's the idea behind Be Central, essentially. You call me one of the founders, which is correct, but I also have to point out that we were about 25 founders in the beginning, and we're now about Yeah, we're now about 60. So it's more of an ambassador role than a real founder role. Although I have to say, like, I've been quite involved. I'm also a resident there. So we have the TechEU office there. I do spend quite a lot of time. There's a program now called We Are Founders, where essentially we take, people who've never built a company before, might not even have thought about building a company, and we go looking for them in their communities and say, hey, you can do this, and we'll guide you. So it's sort of a program that you get a mentor assigned to you, and then they sort of follow you in your journey and help you
So
out.
investing in talent at an early stage.
Exactly, and not necessarily investing capital, but more human capital. Like you just open your network to them. You give them knowledge. You give them feedback on their ideas on a regular basis. So I really like that kind of program. Also in B Central, we have coding schools, which I think is also one of these things. They're not necessarily only for young people. They're also for people who are just unemployed or between jobs or want to have a career change. To cater to people like that in the industry, what it look like today is very, very difficult. So you either do it online or you don't. What B Central wants to provide is a place where you can actually combine those things. You can do part of it online, but you can also come to class, meet with other people, and sometimes these people end up building a company together, doing a startup, or joining a scale-up that is a resident of B Central. So I really like the idea of having sort of a physical place to fall back on. And of course, in the wake of the pandemic, that has become, I think, even more important than before.
Yeah, absolutely. Because now there's been such a big focus on remote work, which of course has many benefits. And a lot of people that we spoke to today have founded their companies remotely or have remote teams. But can you tell us a little bit about having people in one place? Just highlight some of the really special things that happen when you have these people in the same place on this campus working together. And you can have this hybrid model. But what's unique about working together from this B Central campus?
Yeah. Well, any company that works remotely today, or any conference that happens purely online like this one, will tell you the same thing. You can do a lot, but there is certain element that you cannot reproduce online, which is serendipity, which is meeting people in a social setting, or just bouncing off each other, or running into each other in the hallway of a conference or a B Central campus, and just bouncing off each other, getting to know each other from a different perspective than just the purpose of your call or your conference session. So it's very difficult when you want to start a company together, for example. You do have to have a really good relationship. That is not something you can build entirely offline, in my opinion. So even the remote companies now, I guarantee you that most of the founders already knew each other or can meet each other physically. And it's very, very difficult to build culture around remote teams. It's not impossible. I've seen it been done before. There's lots of good examples and there's lots of good research, especially now. But it is very, very difficult. I think it's arguably a lot more difficult than doing it in sort of a physical place, or at least a hybrid model.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And so you said it's very difficult, but not impossible. And that's sort of the area that I love thinking about. So if we're looking at building a culture in a remote team online, even if maybe it's not the preferable way to do it, what are the key things that if you're going to do it, make sure that you do this?
Yeah, constant communication. Transparent communication, and especially not necessarily about the projects or the products or what you're building, but your values. What is important? What is the purpose? Why are we doing this? Why are you working remotely for us and not, any of the millions of companies that are now hiring remotely? Because the playing field is leveled. Everyone can hire now from anywhere. So if you don't give people a sense of purpose, if you don't share your values, or you constantly remind them of your mission and your vision as a founder, then you're going to have a very tough time getting people and retaining people as well, right? So constantly just, it's going to bore you after some time, but it's so important. Constantly communicate about your values, what you're doing, why you're doing it. By the way, this why you're doing it is so, so important. Also in journalism, I'm sorry, I'm going back to earlier, but this is one of the things that journalism in tech really, really needs to ask a lot more to founders. Not what are you building, or who are you building it with, or who are your investors, blah, blah, blah. Why are you doing it? Because you're going to spend I know there's lots of students and maybe first-time founders or aspiring founders. If you're going to spend all of that time and all of that effort and all of the sacrifices that you're going to have to make this work, if you're going to do that, it's better to do it for something ambitious and something that's going to change something, not the world, because, how are you going to really effectively do that? But change what's important to you and have purpose and let that drive you. Why are you spending all that time is what I always want to know from entrepreneurs.
I think that's a really great question. And so from that, within Tech.eu, has your why changed in any small or big way over the course of the time you've been running it? And how do you make sure that that's communicated to the people working in Tech.eu?
Yeah, good question. I think I should highlight that we just got acquired about a month and a half ago. So that's been a big change, of course. But we were always very small. So we had a core team of about 6 people when we got acquired, which is very, very little. And you constantly sort of run into barriers and walls of, resources. You always want more people. You want to do more things, but you run against walls. So our option was to raise more funding. We only raised a small seed round in 2014. So that's quite some time ago. Okay, sorry, your video froze for me. So we were a very, very small team. We got acquired 2 months ago, or even less than 2 months ago, to have more resources, to be able to build more things around the data that we have, to go a bit deeper as well. Because one of the things in European tech journalism, at least, if you focus only on the news, you're also going to miss a lot of the stories. So we want to dig a little bit deeper in the data. We want to hire more journalists to have sort of a more in-depth approach about what's going on, macro trends, sort of predicting the future a bit more than just covering the present. So that's been a big shift for us. I think also the fact that there were no conferences for about a year and a half made our lives very difficult, because Europe is a very fragmented and diverse place. So if you don't have conferences and big events to fall back on, to meet people in person, or to get stories that you might otherwise not get, our lives are just a lot more easier than they used to be in the last year and a half, now that the conferences are restarting.
I'm sorry, I think Zara's having some technical issues. I'm really sorry about that. Just like to bridge the gap until Zara comes back in. There's been some people who've been asking some questions in the chat. If you'd be happy, maybe talk about some of these. I think you just mentioned kind of that you were acquired. Someone asked in the chat what exactly changed once you were acquired. I can ask this question. I can hand back to Zara. She's back here. But maybe if you can just answer this question, what kind of changed once you were acquired? So obviously, I imagine there must be all kind of different changes once you get acquired. Maybe how much decision making one can make. Also, perhaps the new company culture. So what kind of changes did you see once you were acquired?
Yeah, well done, Finn. Welcome back, Zara. So we only just got acquired, so it's very difficult for me to share any real lessons from it. What I will say is that when you go through the process of the acquisition, it makes you really reflect on what you have, who you are, and whether that's going to be a match with the company that buys you. And then you really have to get to know the people well in advance. You have to communicate very clearly to them, but also to your own team about what's going on. So I think transparency is key there, to the degree that you actually can, both legally and just economically. It's much too early for me to say what the big lessons are for now. We're all still very excited and in transition phase and thinking about all the possibilities, but we haven't actually gotten around to doing a lot of the work that we plan to do together. So it's still too early to say, I have to admit.
All right, perfect. Zara, I'll just hand the mic back to you. I'll disappear into the background. Thank you very much for answering.
Well done, Finn. Well done.
Thanks for stepping in, Finn. I appreciate it. Hopefully you can hear me now.
I can.
We do have some more Q&As as well. I'm going to try to blend them into the conversation. Having been on both sides as a journalist and as a founder, I think you have a unique perspective. What are some of the most memorable stories that you've seen? Maybe the most memorable pitches or startups?
Very, very, very difficult one, because I get hundreds of pitches a day, right? So it's interesting. This week I was in Lisbon for Web Summit, and I was hosting a media roundtable for journalists, and actually to talk about how this relationship between startups and journalists is changing, right? And one of the things that we all felt is that the excitement that we had about new tech and testing a new app or talking to a founder for the very, very first time has unfortunately and dramatically gone down quite a lot. There is so much incoming for us. There's so many PR people. There's so many startups that it's very, very difficult for us to still dig deep and really understand the product really well or use it for a few days and then write about it like we used to. That's no longer the case. So I'm a bit sad about the fact that tech has sort of been taken over by the PR people and the founders that have like a good story for the media, but then just step back and do their thing. It's becoming increasingly difficult to sort of get the story behind the story. Also because the journalists themselves are reducing in numbers. Like a lot of them are going to the PR side or having a tough time making money or making their publications sustainable. So we're in a time where tech is so important and the tech impact on society is so important, but the number of journalists that are covering it is so small and they're so overwhelmed that it's starting to get very, very difficult to really dig deeper into stories and really get excited about tech again. I know I sound a little bit, I don't know what the word is, but sort of jaded about the industry. But I when I have conversations with my peers, that really comes forward quite a lot. So I'm far from the only one who feels that way.
That's really useful for everyone to know because the industry of tech journalism is so glamorized. I think it's important to also know what's behind that. So it must be a very high pressure environment, getting pitches all the time from a lot of people and, losing this excitement a little bit. What can people do if they want to get your attention, but they want to share their excitement with you and want to communicate that in a proper way, but also recognize, your time is very precious and you're getting a lot of pitches? What can people do to stand out? And what would you advise them in terms of keeping a good relationship with tech journalists where you have a warm relationship, so you're not just reaching out when you need something, but also not bothering them constantly and bombarding them either?
Yeah. Really good question of the day. I do workshops around this for startups, right? How to approach journalists and how to do PR from my point of view, at least. And one of the things that I want to highlight to these founders whenever I start these workshops is you shouldn't be building companies to get publicity or to get journalists interested in you. You should always be building a company for yourself and to cover an unmet need, to build something that isn't there yet and that you want to be the first to do. You want to service your customers. You want to talk to them constantly. You want to build something that is going to make a dent in your industry, in your country, in the world. So that should always be your primary focus, especially in the first few years, right? Once it's time to get, publicity can help you build that company. Don't get me wrong. So once it's time to do that, just be aware that we are very overwhelmed and be genuine, be authentic, try to be transparent about what you're doing. But most of all, and you said this very well, share your excitement. Actually be passionate about what you're building when you talk to us and explain to us why you're doing it and why it's going to make a difference and why are you doing it and why did you go that direction and not the other one. Try to get us interested in the backstory, your vision, where you're going, how do you plan to get there, why are the methods that you're going to use to get there different from everyone else, how does it fit into the big picture as well, like what does the competitive landscape look like. Don't pretend that you don't have competitors because you will.
Do you see that a lot?
Yeah,
where people say it's just us, no one else has done this before.
Yeah, it's gotten a bit better, but that used to happen a lot. Like, well, who's your competition? They go like, no one. Like that's very sad because that means your market is tiny. That's the worst answer you can give because that means that what you're building is probably not worthwhile. If it would be, you would have competitors, right? So that's the sort of thing. Paint a big picture. Like, what does the world look like in your view, and how do you fit into it? And what's going to change because you're doing this startup?
That's a really good point. I'm going to take some Q&As from the audience. So we have quite a few here.
Wow. That's always very cool.
So someone wanted to know what are the best conferences that you recommend for young founders in the tech ecosystem? So
difficult one because I'm not a young founder in the ecosystem. So, I mean, the big ones, if you can get in, like Web Summit and Slush and Disrupt, I mean, if you can get in, do it. I wouldn't hesitate. I would prepare like a maniac. I would literally just spend weeks preparing for that one big conference because otherwise you'll just be, roaming the halls without purpose and it will be a waste of time unless you just want to enjoy it. That's also possible. But if you want to make it useful, you'll have to prepare. I personally like smaller conferences like Pirate Summit in Cologne. I like covering Eastern Europe a lot because I think there's a lot happening there that's uncharted territory and uncovered. So I do like Digitalk in Bulgaria, for example. I was just in Ukraine for IT Arena. I was in Poland for info sharing Gdansk. So I like to go to like the small ecosystems as well to really see what's happening there, because oftentimes it's a lot more interesting than the big ones who are already mature. It just excites me a bit more. But that's on a personal level. As a founder, I think, also look in your sector, like which conferences make sense for as a trade show, or if you're in advertising, obviously do the big advertising conferences in the world. If you're in gaming, same story. So it depends a bit on what you do, what stage you're in. But in general, the big ones, people always say avoid them. It's just a zoo. But I think if you handle it well and you do it, you prepare, then you can really get something out of it as well. And again, serendipity. You're much more likely to run into someone who can help you or that you can learn from at a big conference than a small one, for obvious reasons.
Absolutely. Another question we have here is how you manage to keep up to date on new tech. You must have a lot of incoming. Do you rely on that solely, or do you also have to go and search for new stories?
Yeah. Good question. I'm very bad at new tech in the sense that testing products or new hardware is not my thing. We cover the business side of things. So I'm actually not that early in adopting new tech, I have to admit. But how do we get stories? It's a lot of it is incoming for sure, because we do build relationships with founders and investors and PR people and agencies. And, after 15 years, they know how to reach you with the right things at the right time. So you just have a lot of incoming, either warm or cold, and we look at everything. Aside from that, we do absolutely go looking for our own stories, because as a journalist, you don't want to wait for someone to come to you to tell a story. Obviously, sometimes you notice something and you want to dig into, or you hear something, from a source that you want to dig into. But that's more the business side of things. So discovering new tech, I do the same things that everyone else does. Product hunt, thing testing, just getting recommendations from friends or people in the industry. It's not much different for a tech journalist than anyone else, I would say.
Hearing that, and also based on all these incredible achievements that you've amassed and the exciting things you've been doing, you make it sound really easy, which I'm sure it wasn't. So a question from me, I wanted to know, what was the most difficult period of that, like the most challenging, and what did you do to get through that? How did you deal with the pressure you were under and things like that?
Oh. Well, I don't know if I was making it sound easy, but I make it sound fun, hopefully, because it is really exciting having sort of a front row seat to new stuff, to the future. So what was the most difficult period? I don't know. I've always worked very, very hard, like long hours. Like for TechCrunch, I remember 11, 12-hour days were sort of the standard, right? So that's a lot of writing and a lot of reading, especially. But you learn so much. Like you talk about it, you write about 1,000 startups, and you see patterns all of a sudden, how they're building it, what they're doing. And I've never really done a startup, but I already know to a degree, like I can see startups doing the wrong things and the right things just by sheer experience, right? So I think it was worth the time that I put in, but I did work very hard for this. And consistency is the key. If you don't write constantly, then you're not going to be a writer. If you don't, cover startups almost religiously every day, then you're not going to be a startup journalist or publication. So you have to be consistent. I think that's also important. Most difficult period for me was probably we had just started out, and in the beginning, the first 2-3 years were very easy, in the sense that we just did whatever we wanted, and we raised a small seed round, so we didn't have to worry about monetization from day one. We could just focus on the journalism and the stories. But there comes a certain point where essentially you have to make money, or you have to build a sustainable business on top of that. We all know media is a very difficult thing to do. So it was very difficult in a sense to build a business model that works. Now we have sort of a very diversified revenue stream, both advertising and market intelligence, like the data reports, and going to events and stuff like that, or helping event organizers. But it was very difficult to bring all of these things together in a sustainable way. It's never been easy. We've been profitable for years, but only barely. So it was always sort of fighting, what do we focus on? What do we invest in? So it's never easy, but it's kind of fun figuring that out as well. Like as long as you don't go bankrupt, everything is fun. Even learning on your way down is sort of, if you have to look at it in a way that, of course, I can use all of this experience going down until I hit rock bottom for the next one. and maybe you don't hit rock bottom, you go back up. So, and then you still have those learnings. So I always took it very, very positively, even the difficult times. And of course, pandemic, because if your life is meeting people and traveling and seeing ecosystems firsthand and like talking to people on the ground, then of course not traveling and meeting people and not doing conferences is very, very annoying.
I can imagine. So it sounds like consistency and also doing what you love, because if you want to be successful in any industry, you're going to put in a hell of a lot of hours. Make sure it's something that, you get out of bed and you're excited to do.
I wouldn't be here talking about this on a Sunday morning if I was, but it's true. Like I'm 15 years in and I still get very excited about the fact that I could teach even one person in the audience something that they can use to build their companies. I get really excited about it.
And hopefully also some aspiring tech journalists, because I know some people were interested in that as a career path as well. So not all founders. I think, as you've said,
do it, please. We need you. We need more tech journalists.
What's your number one piece of advice for people that want to go into tech journalism?
Be consistent, as I already said, but also try to not lose that excitement that I've lost for a bit for various reasons. But, always understand that a startup founder is, it's very, very difficult. Respect them, be empathetic about their journey. Don't waste their time. If you go into tech journalism, do it because you're really passionate about tech journalism, and don't look at it as a means to an end or as a springboard to something else, because that's not going to work out very well for you.
We have another question. What book recommendations you have for people that are interested in tech and startups?
Ooh, tricky one. I have so many. I'll tell you the last two books I read or reviewed, at least. Bad Blood, the Theranos story, because it's a really, really, it's a good warning for, getting mixed up in the hype of building companies rather than building. So that's a good warning. And the other one was Shoe Dog, which is the biography of Phil Knight, who's one of the founder of Nike. Nothing to do with tech, but incredibly inspirational, like a real entrepreneur who had to figure this out in the 70s. So it isn't about tech, but it's about entrepreneurship, and I found it really, really valuable.
That's awesome. Our next question is, what do you think is the best way to find valuable members for your team if you don't have someone in your existing network? I feel like conferences, based on what you're saying, would be a fantastic way. How else?
Conferences, things like Be-Central, like a campus that has, internal and external Slack channels that you can use and leverage. Just going out there, going to meetups, going to workshops in your sector, and try to find sort of people that are interested in the same things as you. Online is an obvious one, not just social networks, but also communities. Don't underestimate the old school networks like LinkedIn and meetup.com for getting to know each other in person, because there really is still a lot of people on there and it's being used intensively. Hiring is the number one problem for entrepreneurs out there. It used to be capital. I would talk to European tech founders and they would say, we can't find money. Now it's we can't find people fast enough, or good people fast enough, or we can't retain them. So that's going to be one of the main challenges for tech companies around the world, to be fair. So yeah, hiring, I can't really give a lot of advice because I've never done a startup and I haven't had to hire, but this is what I hear.
And of course, it has made the playing field more competitive. But do you think remote work has helped with hiring specifically for European startups?
I asked the exact same question on stage to the people I was in Web Summit with.
You can steal their answers.
Yeah, exactly. Because my question was, of course, it's making it easier for European tech companies to get talent from around the world, but it's also making it easier for tech companies around the world to get European talent. So I fall back on what I said earlier. If you have a very clear objective and a purpose and a vision and a mission, and you can communicate it clearly and have a good corporate culture, and you respect people, then I think you already have a head start to like 90% of companies out there, whether in tech or beyond. So focus on that and everything else will sort of follow. People also talk to each other. So if they get recruited, they tell all their friends if they enjoyed. They also tell all of their friends if it really sucked. And that's like, multiply that by dozens or by hundreds. And that's, your reputation's everything. So make sure that you actually do the things that you promised that you're going to do.
That's fantastic advice. There's a lot of different things you said that factor into making sure that your startup really stands out. But of course, you must get a lot of incoming from startups asking you to feature them. How do you quickly filter out the noise, and how can a short message convince you to write about them? So of course, like getting that excitement through, but concisely, because you're not going to sit there and go through like a 10-page pitch deck.
Yeah. Ooh, that's a good one. I have a good bullshit radar, so I can tell when you're trying to just get publicity or when you to be authentic, to try to relate to me, to say something personal about that you get from my Twitter feed, something already capture my attention in the first line, and then it just makes it easier for the next one. Be concise, 2 to 3 paragraphs, make it useful, make sure that I can find more information easily if I want it. So include a link to your product or your team or your About Us page, or like a repository, like an online folder where I can find more information. Just make it easy for me. Don't waste my time. And I don't know, try to be human, try to be funny. Don't use words like leading, innovative, disruptive, game-changing, award-winning. I don't give a shit. Like, honestly, I couldn't care less. These words are used by everyone. It doesn't. They're meaningless.
What do you actually do?
Yeah, what do you actually do, and why are you doing it? Right. So that's what I want to know.
So don't lose sight of the why. Okay, great. Yeah. And our final question that we have today: if you weren't in tech journalism, what would you like to do? And would you ever consider going to found something else and leaving journalism behind?
Yes, I have been thinking a lot about the climate crisis, and tech journalism is fun, and I like highlighting also the people that are doing innovative things in green tech and sustainability innovation. But I would like to play a more active role in that, because I have children. You've heard them scream, and it makes you think about, like, what do you want to tell them when you get older and retire and say, like, I've done my part? Or are you going to say, I watched it and I saw it, but I didn't do anything? So eventually I'll do something probably more concrete in all things sustainability and promoting it.
What a brilliant note to end on. Thank you so much, Robin. This was so much fun. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Zara, you're such a professional.
Thank you. Where can people keep in touch with your work and reach out to you?
Yeah, super easy to find on Twitter, Robin Wauters. Feel free to mention me there or send me a DM. I'm very easy to reach on Twitter, Robin at Tech.eu if you prefer email. Other than that, I'm going to go to all of the conferences in the world in the next year because I missed them. So I'll be at all the conferences. You name it, I'll be there. So
next time we'll have this in person.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.